Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Defender podcast. Super excited to be recording again. My name's Chris Goosen, and I am joined as always by my friend from the Netherlands, Koos.
Hey Chris, good morning. How are you doing?
Doing well. Hey, it's been a month since we last saw each other. Can you imagine? Or can
That's
you believe that it's been a month?
crazy. That's really crazy. It feels like last week or something like that. Yeah.
Man, it really does. Hey, I'm still trying to get my sleep back on track, which is wild,
Really?
right? That I've been home now for, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, and I'm still trying to get my sleep back on track after that trip. That trip completely messed up my sleeping patterns, which
I have
is
a very strict procedure when it comes to getting my sleep back on track. So I try to sleep a little bit on the plane back to Europe. And
yeah,
then I really want to stay awake that first day. So I actually planned a birthday party of a friend of mine. And we went to that party. So I was sure I wasn't going to sit on a couch and fall asleep during the day, to keep up all the way until the night and then stick to my regular schedule immediately. And it seems
yeah.
to work for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I got home on a Monday morning, and I worked on that day. So I went straight from the airport at 6 a.m. to well, I didn't
Wow.
go to the office, but I came here and logged on to work. So I did try and stay awake all day too, but man, it hasn't helped.
Yeah.
Anyway, in today's episode, one big topic, I guess, right? We're looking at Defender XDR, the attack disruption feature. And I know this is something that you've been really sort of digging into, and you're quite excited about. So I figured,
Yeah.
let's have a conversation about this and sort of tell the good folks what this is all about and how it's matured and developed, right? Because it's not a brand new thing. It's been around for a little while, hasn't it?
That's true. I think this is one of the most exciting features, part of Defender XDR. So I think it deserves its own podcast episode, to be honest. Yeah, you're right. The attack disruption is around. It released somewhere in 2023. I don't know the exact month, to be honest. So it's already here for, let's say, 2 years. But obviously, Microsoft is adding new and new features and new capabilities and scenarios to it. And I really saw I saw some really impressive demos last couple of months, and I wrote some blogs about it. So that's why I thought, well, we should put some effort in this and share it with the world, because I think this is a prime example of how all the different defenders, so to speak, can work together in a great way. So what it actually does, it attack disruption, like the name suggests, it is meant to disrupt an attack while it is taking place. So normally your security product, a regular EDR or antivirus, would work something like, we saw certain events, here's the evidence, please investigate it and respond to this. And Microsoft wants to move away from this more and more, and they want to provide actual protection and stop the attackers in their threats when they're active. And that's what attack disruption is all about.
Yeah,
Um,
and
so
I can see why. You mentioned um, how all the defenders work together, right? And I can
yeah.
see, I've been saying for a while that we're in this world now where we have, we used to have this mentality of like best of breed, where
Mhm.
organizations wanted to go out and buy the best product in each sort of domain, right? You
Mm.
bought the best AV from that vendor, you bought the best other tool from that vendor. But I think we're in this world of like best of platform now, where you've got to be able to look at a vendor that has a platform that supports all of these things. And so I can see when you say all the defenders working together, I can kind of see where this might be going, as far as we've got signals from an endpoint product, we've got signals from other defender products, all kind of working to disrupt something that might be going on in the environment.
Yeah, and that's also a bit good that you touch on this. It's also a part of the confusion sometimes, because
Mm,
Microsoft talks about Defender XDR as if it is a single product you can buy, but
mm.
it's actually the encompassing platform containing all the different security products you have to buy separately, or buy E5 and you get all of them, but you have to set them up individually. And that's also what I wanted to touch on today's episode. It is enabled by default, but it is best practice to make sure that everything's set up properly according to best practices to work most optimally. Yeah. Yeah, so like you said, it combines a lot of the signals from all of the different Defender products. Well, not all of them right now, but again, Microsoft is expanding on that every time. Um, when you read into this, you always come across a lot of the marketing mumbo jumbo, I would say. But some of these terms Microsoft use I really like, so I wanted to, with a little bit of a nod, I want to put them in I did put them in the show notes. So Microsoft talks about. When they do things in real time, they're talking about at machine speed. I find that a very interesting wording, and they want to stress that they only apply attack disruption when they are very confident. So high confidence signals, of course, because you want to prevent further damage, but on a false positive, you might include damage without an attack, right? So I think that's important. So it works through some separate stages. So you have the detection part, again, where you correlate all the different signals in a high confidence incident. Then they want to correlate those signals because, for example, something Defender for Identity saw on the identity part and something that Defender for Endpoint saw on an endpoint might not always be correlated together, right? Might not be the same attack. So they need to correlate that. And then they use something they call intent recognition. So they have all kinds of scenarios predefined. They don't tell much about what kind of scenarios are supported for obvious reasons. But they have apparently done a lot of research in this to identify certain familiar attacks they saw on different organizations or in their own environments. And also they're using the organization's attack paths. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Defender XDR can show you attack paths, so your vulnerable machines or how everything's linked together in a graph, so to speak, and they actually use that information to see, okay, when something happens on this part of the graph and then the next link is touched, it might be an attack happening because those two are linked together. And then actually the attack disruption takes place, and it tries to identify compromised assets. So, for example, users, devices, mailbox, apps. So this already gives away a little bit of what products are used in the back to determine what Microsoft calls the blast radius. And it's also a great marketing term. I really like when they use it. You don't want it to happen, but when people talk about blast radius, I'm thinking about explosions and bank heists and whatnot. But so once they determine the blast radius, they know what compromised assets are part of the attack, and then they can in real time block these, contain these, and prohibit further actions. And obviously Microsoft will tell you that it is AI powered because everything is AI powered nowadays, right?
That's right.
I can imagine they use a lot of machine learning algorithms to detect certain patterns, but everything machine learning is nowadays called AI, I guess. So, well, fair enough.
But I think what's interesting here is during the sort of detection phase here, they stress, and when you read the Microsoft documentation on this as well, high confidence is continuously stressed, right?
Yes.
And I imagine that's because they are looking at multiple things that are happening in multiple places and being able to, like you said, correlate them together to say, okay, well, we know for sure that if we see this thing happening on the endpoint and this thing happening on the identity, and perhaps this other thing happening, we know that those things go together in a particular type of attack. And that's how they know for sure, right? The high confidence. And if I remember correctly from some documentation I read, they actually have a number that they put to it, right, for high confidence, like 99.5 or something like that.
They say 99%. So they will also tell you less than 1% of false positives. So they are above 99, but they don't specify any
Gotcha.
decimal number there. But indeed, they want to stress that only when they're very confident, then they go into action. And they actually use all of the telemetry in your environment. So when you're still in control, so when Microsoft decides to perform actions as part of the attack disruption, the incidents and alerts are also in your incident page, right? And they will tag that incident attack disruption to let the SOC analyst know that Microsoft was involved in some of the response as part of the incident. But you are still in control, and Microsoft will pay attention to telemetry data following up an attack disruption action to see how the SOC responds. So if attack disruption, for example, disables a user and the SOC immediately re-enables the user again, that might be useful information to Microsoft to learn for next attacks to even improve that number to a higher one.
Now, for someone who hasn't been across this or come across this before, this might sound really scary because you're thinking in your mind right now, the environment is just doing its thing. It's just doing stuff without me knowing, right? And I guess that's kind of fair in that they are stepping in and they are disrupting attacks right before you can. But these the scenarios where attack disruption occurs, they are very, very sort of set, right? There are very specific scenarios that Microsoft have sort of worked on, where they've over time they've I guess identified these specific scenarios where we know they're high risk, but they've also been able to identify all of the related signals and actions and stuff, events and incidents that happen. And so they know when they see all of these things, it makes up, for example, a business email compromise attack, and they know then how to get in, right? What are those? There are a few of them. There's like 3 or 4 of them. This BEC is one of them. What are the other ones?
Yeah, human-operated ransomware is one of the examples, and there were a couple of scenarios. Adversary in the middle, of course, password spray attacks. But again, they don't disclose every single scenario. These are just examples they put in the documentation, just to stress that they are basing them upon some hypotheses they created up in advance, but they will not disclose all of the details because then you might know how to work around them.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yes, it is a valid point. So based on these scenarios, they try to do the correlation. And again, even if you are that 1% or less than 1% scenario, and attack disruption did contain a device or user or whatever, there might be impact. But I think the trade-off is if it was a real attack, the impact would have been much larger than just an inconvenience for a couple of users, right?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair enough.
And but I know the larger the organization is, the more stressful they get about these kinds of topics. So when I saw Defender for Endpoint being enrolled in larger corporates, I know they didn't like the automation part of it to start with, to contain certain processes, for example. So when you run a malicious PowerShell script to do some process injection in a different executable, Defender for Endpoint might act on that by killing those processes, for example. And again, if there's a false positive there, your application might crash or something like that. And larger companies want to disable those features, and they see the more smaller companies really liking these features because, well, first of all, they don't have the capacity on the security department to actually look into all of these individual signals 24/7. And also Microsoft has a lot of nice examples, and I actually put a couple of them in the show notes on our website, where they have a business email compromise and an adversary in the middle attack in one kill chain, a real world example where you see that after 5 hours after the initial breach, the SOC was able to respond, and with attack disruption, a couple of steps earlier, much time was won during the same attack. So you can't be as quick, I guess, as attack disruption in this regard.
Yeah, fair enough. So what sort of things? So when we talk about disrupting the attack, right? This is where Defender actually steps in and says, hey, like this device doesn't look good. We're going to contain this device in some way, or this user account seems to be compromised. We're going to disable the user account, right? That's the sort of things that we're talking about when we talk about actual actions that are being performed.
Yeah, that's true. So there are actually now a couple of respond actions currently supported. And again, I can imagine Microsoft will expand on this on the future. But right now, they can do something like a device contain, which is a device isolation in Defender for Endpoint. Something relatively new is the user contain, which is different than a disable user. So Microsoft Defender for XDR could decide to disable a user using Entra ID and Defender for Identity to disable the user both in the cloud and on the on-premises environment at the same time, which also prevents a lag in sync time, right? So they disable them immediately on both ends. But they also support something they call a contain user, and this is something that can be done on the endpoint. So I'm actually referring to a blog post of a former colleague of mine, Jeffrey. He's from the Netherlands, and he writes a lot about Defender for Endpoint, and he figured out a way to simulate attack disruption. So this is really useful and interesting to try out in your lab environment. And he has it all documented in his blog post how you can reenact this attack. And what's interesting is that the Defender for Endpoint, separately from Defender for Identity, are acting to different degrees. So containing a user on the endpoint actually means that a certain user is not allowed anymore to connect to that machine, while the account might still be active. And this is done to prevent lateral movement, for example. So when Microsoft suspects a user account being used for lateral movement, but is not 100% sure right to disable the user, go ahead to disable the user, it might deploy a policy across all of the managed Defender for Endpoint clients to make sure that that user cannot do an RDP connection any longer, for example. And it's actually leverage a group policy on the local machine to achieve this.
Okay, wow. So it actually reaches in and does that sort of config during. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's why they call it contain user, contrary to disable user, so that the user is contained in a single place. And they also recently added third-party support with SAP. So this is the first third-party response action. So when you configure SAP through Microsoft Sentinel correctly, they can, for example, contain a compromised asset by locking suspicious SAP users when they detect a financial process manipulation or something like that.
That's
pretty
cool.
I can imagine more actions will follow in the future.
Right. Now, I can imagine there'll be folks who kind of think about this and go, well, okay, well, this is great for my regular user environment where I have information workers and frontline workers, perhaps. But there may be certain user accounts or certain things that I want to avoid or exclude from this process, right? We have the capability to do that, don't we?
Yeah, so that's why it's important to also make sure that you follow some configuration steps. And Microsoft did detail these in their documentation, and that's something I wanted to touch on today's episode as well. So again, attack disruption is enabled by default, but it relies on certain components being set up. And one of the things you can do indeed is exclude certain device groups, for example, so that you exclude entire devices in of a certain category in your environment, and you can also exclude users in Defender for Identity in this case. But again, you have to be careful, right? There's a trade-off there. Because if you would say, well, my domain controllers, they are very important, I want to exclude them for any of these actions, well, this might also be the place where people try to attack and steal your credentials, right? So Microsoft does not advise you to exclude anything. So that is best practice, but there will surely be environments who think differently of this.
Yeah, that's fair. I think everyone has some uniqueness in their environment, right, where you've got to be able to address it. So it's nice to have the feature, but I think very important warning, as you said, right, is don't sort of be tempted to just go and find the most important things in your environment and exclude them, because those most important things are also going to be the the richest target for the bad folks.
Yeah, and I saw a session from Eyal. He's a PM from Israel on attack disruption. And he actually mentioned that although the false positive rate is less than 1%, customers are actually asking him if attack disruption can be even a little bit more aggressive. So customers are apparently letting them know some of them at least, that they would accept a few more false positives as a trade-off that attack disruption does more in practice and reality. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, so according to Microsoft, they are currently disrupting 40,000 incidents a month, and that's also a crazy number, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that there's that many things that are being there's that many environments that have this deployed, and where this is actually making a difference. Can you imagine how many environments there are overall where this isn't deployed and they don't have that telemetry, right? So it just shows you the scary sort of state of the internet in general, and man, it's all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah, and companies might not yet be aware of the fact that attack disruption did anything in their environment just yet. So I would also invite people to look in their current environment, go into the advanced hunting page in the security.microsoft.com portal, and run a hunting query I put in the show notes, where you can see if there are any incidents with the label attack disruption on there in the past. So there might have been certain steps already taken for you without you noticing it.
Yeah, wow.
So back to the configuration part. So Defender for Endpoint, again, like I said, it relies on a couple of things. And one of the things is also the device discovery. So as you might know, Chris, Defender for Endpoint is able to discover devices in the same network, which might not be onboarded with Defender for Endpoint. And this is a really important factor for attack disruption to work. So for example, when a unmanaged device in the network is compromised and somebody tries to move laterally from an unmanaged device into a managed device, it is important to understand that, well, it's important to know that Defender needs to be aware of that unmanaged device in the first place to detect that lateral movement. And that's why you need to go into the settings and enable device discovery and put it on the standard mode. And some companies might have switched it to a lower setting, basic in this case. Well, I would advise everybody to put it back into standard. And it already gives you very valuable information of what devices you might have missed during the onboarding, right?
Yeah, okay. Very good.
I always see companies struggling with maintaining a 100% compliance rate across all of their devices, and I think device discovery is a great example. And there's also a hunting query I put in the show notes, which you can run to list all of the discovered devices, including the last seen timestamp and by which other device that unmanaged device was seen. So it helps you pinpoint also what part of your environment and which network the device was seen. And this is also to work against, let's say, malicious devices being plugged into a network, right? So if somebody goes into as a printer mechanic, for example, we've all seen the examples, and plugs in a Raspberry Pi or whatnot in some of the outlets, that device will be discovered by other endpoints if this is enabled.
Okay.
Another thing that's important is that you have to run the latest Sense agent. So this is the actual agent running on the endpoint from Defender for Endpoints. And I also included a hunting query in the show notes, which you can run to get a list of all the endpoints which might still have an older Sense agent, so that you know that you need to take a closer look at this. It might be good practice to create a detection or a dashboard with this query to keep an eye on this to make sure everything's up to date. Sometimes these automatic updates fail for some reason, and it's good to make sure that everything's up to date, right?
Yeah. These KQL queries that you've included in the show notes are going to be really, really useful for folks. So, folks, definitely make sure you pay attention to the show notes. We've mentioned it before on the show as well. As a lot of effort goes into the show notes, and these are very much standalone blog posts on their own, really. If so definitely pay attention there. There's some really helpful nuggets been supplied there. Thank you, Koos, for the effort there.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah. So sometimes I'm struggling with the whole concept of a podcast, right? So I want to share stuff. I want to show people some screenshots of settings, and now I'm just able to talk about it. But at least we have the show notes to put in some evidence and actual some helpful queries in there. Yeah.
Yeah, we promise we
Definitely.
won't be breaking out the PowerPoints on this show ever.
No,
But
death
the
by
show notes,
PowerPoint, they say, right?
the show notes will be there. They're always going to be, as comprehensive as we can make them. So
Yeah. Yeah, so next up, something you need to configure is Defender for Identity. So again, we mentioned also the very important part of attack disruption, because your identities, well, a lot of companies still have their on-premises Active Directory, and users might live there. There might be domain admin groups you want to monitor closely to make sure that when new users are added to that, for example, you get an alert. So Microsoft wants you to enable Defender for Identity as part of attack disruption, and you actually have two ways of performing actions on the actual domain controllers. And maybe Chris, you can elaborate a little bit more into this, because at local Active Directory, it's been a while since I touched that. By default, a sensor is using the local system account, which it might not, well, it's the default, but Microsoft advises you that you have the ability to use a what they call a GMSA account, a group managed service account, right? Instead. But they stress that if you configure that and the account does not exist anymore, then obviously Defender for Identity will no longer work correctly.
yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think the GMSAs are interesting because back in the day when we created service accounts in AD, folks just created a user account, gave it domain admins, gave it a long password, and off they went. Right, that was just how it was done. And the group managed service accounts are just a way to have the Windows operating system manage those service accounts, right, for you, and you don't have to worry about a password that has to be changed by a user or anything like that. But honestly, I very rarely see these used correctly.
Really?
When I do Active Directory assessments for customers, more often than not, they're not using them, or they're only using them for a very select small amount of things. So I'd be interested. It's interesting. I would imagine that in most scenarios, the local system account is probably what is going to be used here for the sensor.
Yeah. Yeah, so is the GMSA, is that a cloud of the on-prem equivalent of a managed identity in Azure then, I guess, in Entra ID?
Yes, I guess that is a good way to put it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I can imagine on-prem applications need to support GMSA specifically to be able to work with them, right?
And that's right. Yeah. So a lot of third parties don't always work so well, when you look at third party things. So no, that's a good call out.
Yeah. Yeah, Microsoft also stresses that you want to make sure that all of your sensors in MDI, Defender for Identity, are healthy. So Microsoft Defender for Identity really relies heavily on auditing policies, because they need all of the audit events from Active Directory to come in on the domain controllers, to be logged, to be picked up by the agent, to send to the Defender for Identity platform to be pre-processed. And as part of the Defender for Identity onboarding, you go through a documentation telling you exactly what kind of auditing policies you need to enable on your domain controllers. But we see some configuration drift there with customers sometimes they touch policies, they rearrange them, they make changes to them, unassign them, I don't know what they do, but for some reason all of a sudden your audit policies are not being logged anymore, and then Defender for Identity gets an unhealthy sensor. So you can check the status of these sensors in the portal to make sure that all of the domain controllers are still configured as they should. So that's
and it's there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes there, right? With these sensors, grabbing all of those alerts and then processing them and sending them up. So it's worth making sure that things are working as they should, and not just sort of setting them and for walking away from it, because it's there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I really like this approach where Microsoft collects a lot of the logs, or raw logs, so to speak, into their own workspace or whatever storage they have in the backend, and just provide you the alerts and the incidents that they correlate out of it. And we touched on Microsoft Sentinel a couple of times, and this is one of the topics I like to speak about a lot. And I see companies still having a desire to collect all of the raw logs from all domain controllers and all kinds of network appliances. And I'm like, okay, so you're trying to recreate your own Microsoft Defender for Identity, so to speak, right? By collecting them and doing your own detections on them. And I think what Microsoft does is really really useful, because they have the power of the numbers, right? They have so much telemetry and data. It's probably unlikely that you're able to come up with better detections than they do. So yeah, so that's why they rely this much on the audit logs. Defender for Cloud Apps is also covered. There are a couple of steps in the show notes, again, linking to Microsoft documentation. You have to make sure that the Cloud App, Defender for Cloud App, is connected to Microsoft 365 through a connector. App governance should be turned on. And also in Defender for Office 365, there are a couple of key points, like some auditing requirements, again, and also safe links policy needs to be present, some details like that. And again, without setting this up, attack disruption might still work for endpoint and identity related, but you want to cover as much as possible, right, by making sure all of these products are enabled and configured in a proper way.
Yeah, if you think about it, I mean, the way that, to do, for example, the business email compromise scenario, right? Really, you need to be able to look at the mailboxes. You need to be able to look at things that are events that are happening within the mailbox, which means Exchange Online is a pretty big requirement here, and being able to get to the unified audit log and all of those types of things.
Yeah, so I can imagine you still come across some customers with actual running their own Exchange, right? Maybe on premises or in the cloud.
Yeah, look, I haven't. It's been a while since I've had any customers who are running Exchange Server in the cloud.
Okay.
It has happened, and I've seen some pretty large deployments of it. But yeah, there still are those folks who are on Exchange on-prem, Exchange Server in their own data center, and there's we know that Exchange, what are they calling it? Subscription edition is going to be due out at sometime at the end of the year, I think. And there's not a lot of time for folks who are on 16 and 19 to be getting ready for that upgrade. So yeah, we feel for those folks, but very often the decision, their place and where they are now is based on some technical debt and decisions that they've made, right? So but yeah, for this to work, really, you need to be online. Exchange Online is where you want to be if you want to take advantage of this capability.
Yeah, so customers still running Exchange 2016. That sounds crazy to me. They had a couple of years to migrate away from that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And hey, Exchange 2013 is still around as well. There are a lot of customers that are still running that. So
I don't want to know. I actually heard from a customer a couple of weeks ago, which we helped with a completely different project, but they finalized migrating away from Lotus Notes a couple of months ago. So I was like, oh, that's still around as well. And that's great.
Yeah, I'm sure. All these things are. There are all these bespoke places all over that still have many of these crazy things. I think the last time I saw Notes myself was 2019, maybe. Was probably the last time I saw Lotus Notes. But hey, I'm sure that still exists.
Yeah, we all know how it goes, especially with the larger corporations. They have a lot of history and a lot of legacy applications for the same reason. But it's really hard to protect those environments because they have this stuff running around, like Exchange 2013. I can imagine it's not safe to have that exposed to the internet any longer, right?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't want to. Hey, it's difficult, right? Because I think I know of organizations that are still trying to get off 2013, right? And those types of projects can take years if they're a very large environment. But also, it's perhaps that's a conversation for a different episode, right? Is the perils of old software. But no, I see what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So lastly, I want to touch on notification. So we did touch on customers might be fearsome of Microsoft interrupting and actually going to take action on certain response. But you can enable notifications on these actions. So it might be a good idea in general to configure a notification whenever a device is isolated, for example, so that a certain team gets an email that did happen. And it might be a SOC analyst doing it manually, but it might
Mm.
also be caused by attack disruption. And now at least you know that somebody deliberately isolated a device, for example. Same goes with contain user, disable user. So when you go into the portal, you can go to settings and you have a notification option with a pull down menu where you can actually select which kind of actions should trigger a notification alert, and then at least you can, well, maybe sleep a little bit more easily, knowing that attack disruption is fully enabled. But whenever it does something that can really be impactful in your environment, at least there's also an email going out to certain teams. And it also makes sure that, for example, when attack disruption disables a user and a SOC analyst is not aware of that, and he gets there's a service, or the service desk, for example, gets a call by somebody not being able to log in any longer, and the service desk just re-enables the account again, and the attacker can abuse it again, right? So notification paths, I think, are very useful to consider as well.
Yeah, because also, I mean, someone might not be in the console looking at the alerts and stuff at that time, right? So yeah, I can see how that would be super important.
Yeah, especially because these actions can be very impactful, right? So,
Mm.
so in the show notes, I put some links to a lot of documentation on Microsoft, some configuration guides, but also, again, a shout out to my former colleague Jeffrey Appel. He writes a lot about Defender for Endpoint. I think whenever you Google anything on Defender for Endpoint, I think he sometimes comes up even higher than Microsoft's documentation. He also wrote about attack disruption, and if you want to try out the simulation he has written, he makes use of Mimikatz and Impacket, which are red teaming tools to manipulate certain credentials and cached credentials. You can go read along and try it out yourself and see attack disruption in action.
Yeah, that's super useful resources there, because I think Jeffrey stuff, I've come across a lot of his stuff in the past. So yeah, he puts a lot of effort into his posts. He writes old school blog posts with screenshots and all the rest of it. So it's really useful stuff to read. So very cool.
Yeah, and the technical guys like you may really like the stuff. I wonder sometimes how it's possible that Jeffrey has more than 24 hours in a day, because he's cranking out these blog posts sometimes on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Hey, there are a few people in our community that are like that, right? You kind of wonder. I was just thinking today that wondering if Meryl Fernandez ever sleeps, because he also seems to be everywhere all at once.
Also a prime example.
Yeah. That super useful is the attack disruption stuff. I think this is really valuable information. Thanks for kind of running through it here. I think really is, if you've got E5 and you have this capability, there's very little for you to do to be able to take advantage of this. And chances are it's probably saved your bacon already, right? I think for a lot of folks, if you didn't know about it, but you have all of these capabilities enabled, it may have already been working for you, and you just you haven't realized it. So really useful information to kind of to talk through.
Yeah, and if you do not have E5 just yet, and you're up for renewal on your existing EDR or antivirus solution, I really think it's useful to consider moving to Microsoft Security Stack. So, like we mentioned earlier, if your identities live in Okta and you use CrowdStrike as EDR, and you have a different AV solution, and you have, Exchange on-prem, all of this nice fancy stuff will not work for you, or at least not in the full coverage mode. So I think Microsoft has a really interesting feature in this way, where all of their tools work together. So I would really consider switching, perhaps even to this, because you cannot achieve this without different products.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that, as I said in the beginning, right? Sort of best of platform type scenario where it really makes a lot of sense to have all your eggs in this really large basket.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know companies also are a little bit scared of the idea. Vendor lock-in is a thing for a couple of years now already. So yeah. You had a community project prepared,
Yes, I
Chris.
was just about to say, moving on to community project, and honestly, I think this is a very topical community project because it really does touch nicely and go nicely with what we've just talked about, right? There's a Microsoft MVP, and I think he's based in the UK, called Mesbah Uden, and he's put together a PowerShell script that helps administrators, identify and respond to security incidents in Exchange Online, right? He refers to it as a Microsoft 365 security incident investigation tool, which is quite a mouthful. But really,
Yeah.
it's very much focused on Exchange Online. And what's great about this is it allows you to quickly investigate. If you've had an incident in your environment, you can use the script to look for those sort of indicators of compromise, right? So very often, if I've worked with a customer where they've had a business email compromise, um, incident happen, and they don't have to say attack disruption, which has disabled the account for them. Generally, what happens is when a bad actor gets into a mailbox, they do a bunch of things, right?
Yeah.
So one of those things is almost always they're going to go create inbox rules, things that will remove sent items immediately or auto forward attachments onto them, things like that, to try and keep their foothold and retain
Yeah.
persistence in the environment. Those types of things. They'll mess around with mailbox permissions and grant themselves access to things or what have you. And what his script does, and I love this because it's a one-stop shop tool for looking at these types of incidences, is it uses the Exchange PowerShell module. So it's doing some stuff with the audit logs in Exchange Online, and it's using Graph as well to go and look for these types of indicators of compromise. So the 6 that he's got listed, that he kind of looks for, is malicious inbox rules, which we've talked about. Unusual email volume, if all of a sudden the mailbox starts spamming email out, things like that. Permission changes to mailboxes, right? If you've got CEO mailboxes and stuff like that, and all of a sudden delegates get added to it, that type of thing, that's potentially a red flag. Critical email deletion detection, and then he's got export monitoring as well, right? And again, if you've got a help desk mailbox or some other heavily guarded mailbox that all of a sudden starts dumping all its mail, right? That could potentially be an indicator of compromise. So I really like what he's done here. Put all of this stuff together in sort of a single tool that you can kind of get from GitHub and run. And I think he's made it modular, so you can actually run the individual checks separately, or you can run the tool to do things. I would props to him for doing that. I think this goes really well with the discussion we've just had on this attack disruption and just generally attacks. And if you're an Exchange administrator, Exchange Online, I would highly suggest you take a look. I've got a link in the show notes to the GitHub repo for this. And obviously, so of course, if you like it or you think there's something missing or you want to provide feedback, feel free to get in touch with Mesbah and shoot him a note.
Yeah, thanks for creating this, Mesbah. And it's a little bit like advanced hunting, but then on your Exchange audit logs, right? So we touched on hunting in the past. So it might be good practice to make this part of your hunting strategy.
Yeah, very, very cool stuff. So wanted to share that. There's also a really large blog post, which I actually haven't linked to, but on the Practical 365 blog, he actually breaks it down in really deep detail. But I've got a link to his own blog and his Git repository here, so you can find him. With that, I think that hopefully brings us to the end of hopefully a very interesting and fascinating sort of threat related show.
I hope people found it informative.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always open to feedback. Please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything specific you want us to talk about or to catch up with. Sadly, we don't have any more in-person events coming up in the near future, but we'll continue to do these every month, as we have been, and we've always got plenty of things that we want to talk about, and not enough time. So, but
Microsoft keeps us busy with new products and features every week, right? So
that's
we'll
right.
be fine.
That's right. So yes, thanks again for listening. Please, feel free to like, subscribe, shoot us a note if there's something that's on your mind, and we look forward to your company on the next episode. Kos, thank you. I know you've got to kick off your day, so really appreciate you joining me early in the morning. And
Yeah,
hey,
I'm not sure if you noticed, but the sun is shining a little bit brighter this time of year. So it's actually becoming a little bit of summer over here. So finally, the dark days are over, I guess.
yeah, we're getting them here now. It'll be
Yeah.
dark. Probably 20 minutes from now, it'll be fully dark outside here. So we'll trade
Well,
places for the next 6 months.
enjoy your evening. I'm going jump into my car, drive to the office.
Cool.
See you next
Take
time,
care,
Chris.
folks.
Thank you very
See you
much.
next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.